Welcome to the Mad Podcast on YouTube. And in these videos, we're sharing successful entrepreneurs who are sharing their case studies of mergers, acquisitions, and deals. And in today's episode, we have world-renowned expert Jeremy Harbour sharing his experience of acquiring businesses using zero cash up front. In fact, Jeremy's become so successful at this, he's now teaching other business owners, entrepreneurs how to do this. So I'm sure you're going to really enjoy this episode as Jeremy takes us through his story, his business story, if you like, of how he got started in mergers, acquisitions and deals. You're going to really love this and I hope you enjoy it. Don't forget to subscribe below, hit that notifications bell so you get the latest videos as they are released. And remember, if you need help with your mergers, acquisitions and deals, you can connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message there. I look forward to seeing you soon. Enjoy the show. Okay, everyone, welcome to the Mad Podcast. And as you know, we are talking mergers, acquisitions and deals. And in this episode, I'm very pleased to have Jeremy Harbour. Hello, Jeremy.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. And glad to have you on the podcast today. And for those of you listening that may have not heard of Jeremy, would you like to introduce yourself and just say a little bit about your background, please?
Yeah, certainly. I'll try and squeeze it into as short a space as possible. But yeah, I mean, look, I was an entrepreneur from a very, very young age. I was the annoying kid at school that was always trying to sell you stuff. I left school at 15 to pursue a business I'd started when I was 14. So I didn't do the traditional kind of school route. That business ultimately failed when I was about 18, 19. I then started a telecoms company. Telecoms was booming in the 1990s. Mobile phones were getting smaller. Everything was going, in a very, very fragmented way. And then the market consolidated and everybody was buying everybody else. And that was my education on mergers and acquisitions. So I did my first M&A deal, which was a little mobile phone shop down the road from my mobile phone business. I did that deal 24 years ago or something like that. I actually did another deal in that same, well, about 2 weeks later. And in 18 months, I did about 13 different acquisitions of companies. And it was like a baptism of fire going from a, solopreneur, entrepreneur to suddenly running this big group of companies. Anyway, fast forward, I now, I've done well over 100 deals myself. I've advised on a couple of hundred more. In 2009, I set up the Harbour Club, which is the largest global community of M&A professionals in the world. And we help entrepreneurs understand how to do transactions in a safe way, minimizing capital exposure and taking on expensive and risky bank debt. And currently my main focus is on capital markets transactions, so taking companies public and using those public companies to acquire more companies.
Brilliant. Well, that's one of the best.
Another 15 minutes of that if you want.
yeah, that's the best resume of someone's CV I've probably ever heard. But particularly with mergers and acquisitions, which is what we want to talk about today. And I know you've got numerous case studies that you could share with us. I mean, this could go on for quite some time. So would you like to just, share your first case study with us?
Yeah, so actually, for my first case study, I'm actually going to use my first ever 2 deals, which is over 20 years ago. But I think, a lot of the people listening to this, I'm guessing will be people that perhaps haven't taken that first step yet. And so I think it's quite important to understand, the thought process and what happened there. And actually, the story's kind of interesting. I mean, basically, I was running this telecoms company. We'd grown very quickly, and we got to kind of that £1 million turnover level. It was sort of 2-3 years into the journey. And I think at that point, we popped up on the radar of a whole bunch of companies that were interested in consolidating the telecoms space. And so the phone started ringing and the letters started coming in from people saying, you know, can we talk to you about acquiring your company? Now, I was always, you know, looking for any excuse not to do a proper day's work. So I would have all of these meetings with these random strangers as sort of part of my business education, and partly to avoid doing the other things that were on my to-do list that I really should be doing. So I sat across the table from, I mean, at some points, it was 2 to 3 different companies a week that were approaching us about this. So I heard a lot of different pitches, and this is the best way to describe them, by the way, well, pitches from people that were trying to acquire my little telecoms company. And what's interesting, I mean, with telecoms, it's a really straightforward case for merging, because there's quite a bit of apathy amongst the client base. So people aren't particularly loyal to a telecoms company. You know, when people asked me who my biggest competitor was, I used to say apathy, because nobody gives a shit, frankly, who they get.
Yeah.
As long as it keeps working and they get a reasonable level of service, you know, they're happy to stay where they are, even if somebody flashes a lower rate in front of them or whatever. And so what you can do is you can effectively acquire that apathy. You can get that inertia that company's been able to develop. And when you do acquire that inertia, you get rid of all of the costs on the other side. So you think of 2 boutique telcos, like my one was back then, doing $1 million of revenue. You know, almost our entire cost side, apart from the actual cost of the minutes, could disappear in an M&A transaction. In other words, you didn't need our building, you didn't need our staff, you didn't need our IT systems, billing systems, computers, desks, chairs, etc., etc., etc. You could literally get rid of the whole lot. You know, so it's not like when you roll up something like hairdressing salons, or when you roll up hairdressing salons or kindergartens or you know, things like this. You get very few economies of scale in that kind of transaction, because you still need, you know, with a kindergarten, you have to have a certain number of staff per number of pupils, and you can't change that just by having lots of them. You have to have the independent locations, and you can't just take all the kids from 50 different places and stick them all into one location. So, you know, the roll-up of telcos is quite smart, because there's a lot of instant synergies that would fall out of the bottoms. So anyway, long story short, I was having all these meetings with all these people about acquiring my company to add to their company. And I started to notice a similarity in all of the conversations. And the similarity was they weren't going to give me any money. They certainly weren't going to give me, you know, a lot of money up front. So it was all kind of a deal structure, jam tomorrow type of opportunity. But what was interesting is that these presentations are incredibly compelling. They actually solved lots of the problems that I had in the business right then. They would help me accelerate the growth of the business further, and they would potentially help me create wealth for myself, because I'd be getting this kind of you know, exit value over time as I you know, as I continue to grow the business with them. But it was still nagging in my mind that basically, you know, I wasn't going to get any cash up front, and you know, I was growing bootstrapped business at the time. So, you know, I described it as robbing Peter and not always paying Paul. You're constantly kind of maximizing every pound that comes through the door, you know, to get the maximum use out of it. And so the idea for me of buying a company had never occurred to me in a million years. You know, this idea just seemed far-fetched, that you'd have to take on loads of debt from the bank, or the bank wouldn't lend me any more money. You know, I didn't have any cash, and so I just thought it was beyond me. And then having these meetings, it kind of made me realize that maybe I could do it. You know, maybe this was a strategy that I could use to grow my business. And so I thought, well, where do I start? You know, to try and find a business that I could acquire. Now, luckily, this was pre the days of, you know, Google and the internet and things like that. We were at very, very early days in the internet revolution at that point. And so, I mean, nowadays, what you would do is you would Google businesses for sale, and you would get sucked down those rabbit holes of business brokers and business for sale websites, which are an enormous waste of time. But fortunately, I managed to avoid that. I did approach a few brokers, but it was quickly apparent that the deals that they were presenting to me were massively overvalued and had completely unrealistic expectations of how the deal should be structured. So I decided the only way was for me to do sort of direct outreach. Now, at the time, I was going to lots of networking meetings because that's where I got most of my new telecoms clients from. The great thing about telecoms is everybody uses a phone. So when you went to a networking meeting, you know, everyone in the room is a potential target.
Prospect,
I said managing director or CEO or something like that. Although my business card said that, I was really a glorified salesperson. I was really just running around. I looked at everybody in terms of, you know, how many phones did they use, how much are they spending on their phone bill, and can I get them to switch over to me instead. And so, you know, it's very much a sort of hunting kind of situation. But anyway, I started going to the networking meetings and I started saying, I'm looking for a mobile phone or fixed line telephone company that I could buy. And what was really interesting is that subtle pivot in what you say you do. And of course, I say this to lots of the people in the Harbour Club community, what you answer to that question, what do you do, is a choice. You can say, you know, you can say, you know, what you're planning to do, just as easily as you can say what you've done in the past. And what people tend to do is distill down what they've done in the past and give this long diatribe around the topic of what do you do. I think I probably did it at the beginning of this show. So, but what I did is I said I was looking for businesses to buy. A really interesting thing happened when I did that. The dynamics of the room and the introductions and conversations I had changed completely. I think for a start, they must think, well, an entrepreneur who's got a telecoms company who's now looking to buy other telecoms companies must be in the kind of top 1% of entrepreneurs. So suddenly I became a very interesting person to go and talk to. Plus, I wasn't going to try and sell them anything. And I think that's disarming as well in terms of I was no longer a threat. So they were happy to kind of share information with me. And look, I didn't know what I was doing at all. I was in my early 20s. I always looked really young for my age. So in my early 20s, I was a late shaver. And I looked extremely young, and so it was often difficult to be taken seriously. And I found it was like the chatting up people in a bar and keep getting slapped around the face. You know, I kept going into these meetings. I didn't know what I was talking about. I was green. I looked really young. And it just wasn't kind of working. And I found this. I was at a networking meeting. It was at Wycombe Wanderers, the High Wycombe football stadium. It was at their, they were running monthly business networking events in their VIP sort of suites there. And so we were in a networking session there. And what was interesting is normally if you go to a networking event and there's a competitor there, you're in panic stations that they're talking to the same people you were talking to and all that sort of stuff. Now, the competitor was the one I wanted to talk to. They're the ones that I wanted to go and see. So I find out there's a mobile phone business in there and I make a beeline for them and I start chatting to them. And what was really interesting is that he had this mobile phone shop in Slough. They had about 1,000 active customers, which is about what we would connect in an average year of operations. So we're getting about 100 connections in a year. They were dealing with Cellnet. We dealt with Vodafone. Cellnet at the time, there were two licenses back then, Cellnet and Vodafone, and Vodafone were very pro third-party channel, so very helpful to people like me. And Cellnet kept changing their mind, like I changed my underwear. So one week they would be very much pro the dealer channel, and another week they would just go off the idea completely. And so he was having loads of challenges with his supplier. He had another business on the side, refurbishing properties, which was making him loads of money. And the final thing was that the shop he was in, the retail outlet he was in, was going to be bulldozed and turned into apartments. And so I basically put my offer on the table, which was nothing, zero down and payments for a period of time. The business actually made £12,000 net profit in the previous year. He had very high overheads because of the shop. Plus, he wasn't really getting many new customers. He was mainly just upgrading the old customers. So that netted down to 12 grand. So I'd offered to give him 15,000, but paid over a period of time as we migrated the customers onto our customer base, which actually would be incredibly profitable for us because we'd be moving them from one network to another where you've got a poacher's commission. So we would make 6 figures out of moving them over and only have to share a small amount with him. But he would get more than a year's worth of profit. He would get to focus on the other business that makes more money anyway, and he could just walk away and let the bulldozers bulldoze the place. So, you know, we put my offer on the table. He obviously wanted 15,000 up front. We wanted to pay 15,000 over time, and that was the kind of impasse. And that's a very traditional impasse that we see people arrive at. But you have to remember the small company M&A market. And okay, this one was particularly small. We don't normally talk to anything of that sort of size anymore. But the small sort of company M&A market is definitely a buyer's market. There are a lot of companies out there with not many options and almost no buyers. So what I didn't realize at the time is there wasn't anybody that was going to give him that £15,000 check. There was no one that would just, you know, turn on that and take a punt on it. But I was, he convinced me he had other buyers in the mix, and I was convinced he had other buyers in the mix. So I actually wasted my next 2 or 3 months, because it was 2 or 3 months until the bulldozers were going to knock his property down. So that was his kind of ticking time bomb. And I think that was really useful as well, because had he not had the ticking time bomb, I don't think I would have had the abilities back then to actually close it, to come up with a compelling reason why you should do it now and not later or later. And, you know, it could procrastinate forever, basically. So that was really useful. We had this ticking time bomb that was going to, you know, put a line under things. And I actually spent that 3 months trying to raise money. I was running around trying to get people to put some money in, or you know, friends, family, and fools, as they say, by you know, trying to just grab those few pounds. And he kept repositioning, or we collectively were repositioning the deal. So it kind of started at 15, you know, 100% of the money up front, and it slowly crept down. And I remember, you know, a week out, it was down to 2.5 grand up front. And I thought, I must be able to lay my hands on 2.5 grand. But I literally had a situation at the time, and I remember it was a choice. Do I pay my credit card bill or my staff? I mean, we used to buy all the hardware on my credit card. So it was like, do I pay the credit card bill or the staff at the end of the month, you know, that critical month end. And so literally giving this guy 2.5 grand just wasn't an option. There wasn't that gas in the tank, even in a business doing over $1 million a year in revenue. So anyway, like the day of the bulldozers came, and he closed the deal on that day, and I literally was able to fill a little van up with all of the stuff from the shop, all of the stock and other bits and pieces that we wanted, and literally drive back to my office. And yeah, everything else kind of went to plan in terms of we just moved the customers over to us. We got all the bonus commission. We paid him out his 15,000. And the key thing for us is that we grew by a year's worth of sales in an afternoon. So, you know, straight away we went from, you know, with zero marketing spend, zero capital exposure, really zero risk. We added a whole year's worth of growth in a day. And so that was a really powerful lesson for me, because what is it they say, you know, according to the laws of physics, the bumblebee can't fly, just nobody's told the bumblebee yet, you know. And for me, it was that kind of epiphany in that I'd done the impossible. I'd done an acquisition without using any cash. And look, necessity is the mother of invention. I think not having any cash was definitely the reason I was able to do it, because had I had the money, I would have given it to him. There was 50 times during that negotiation I would have written the check, and I never would have got the valuable lesson that it's possible to do without the money. So it was a hugely valuable lesson, and it was just an absolute game changer for my career. I mean, that was the first one. I had the next one 2 weeks later. So it was literally like a champagne cork that popped.
Yeah, and what I wanted to highlight was that mindset shift. You went from looking for customers to looking for businesses to buy And when you share that message with the people that you're meeting, as you rightly said, you have a whole new conversation, and I think it's fascinating. And I guess that's the start. And I think many business owners just don't think it's possible. It's not within their mindset, their world. What do you say to those people?
Yeah, look, it is a whole new world. I think one of the challenges is, look, I love this expression that the day you think you know the most about business is the day you start. You know, because before you've ever started a business, it all looks logical and it all looks like it makes sense. And we create a product and we do some marketing and we get some customers and like everybody's happy. When you actually do it, is it difficult? I mean, you know, there is so much to learn. I mean, I described it as that baptism of fire earlier. You know, just doing a startup and learning how to run a business is a huge, monumental task. So when you've finally got some degree of competence, and by the way, very few people ever get completely competent at it, and those that claim they are, I think, you know, sometimes aren't always as competent as they may look on the outside. But you know, once you've got some degree of competence around running a business, the idea of learning something else, which is monumentally huge, you now have a better understanding of how difficult and how illogical the world of business and dealing with human beings generally is. And so it's incredibly daunting for people to sit outside of that. Plus, you've got all of these mixed messages. So you've got, you know, all the advisors telling you can't do it without advisors. You've got all of the, you know, the conventional wisdom telling you need loads of money and you need to borrow loads of money. You keep seeing these deals in the newspaper, $100 million deal, $50 million deal. This company's bought this company for 1.2 billion. What you're looking at there is headlines, not deal structures. And so quite often behind the scenes, the structure is incredibly different, and you'll see how capital efficient a lot of very large companies are able to do deals, either using their own stock. If they're a public company, they're issuing stock to close deals. So always, you know, the headline doesn't tell the story. And I think that creates a barrier to people because they assume you need to have all of this wealth and capital before you can get started, and you simply don't. And then, of course, you're bombarded by the kind of charlatans trying to sell you their get-rich-quick schemes around how to buy, you know, businesses no money down, and all you need is my gold, platinum, diamond mentoring program, and you'll be making gazillions by tea time, you know. And again, that kind of makes it fall into the slightly scammy category and alienates a lot of people, puts a lot of people off even trying to understand this sort of stuff. So I would say, you know, if you are an entrepreneur and you're running a business and you want to transition from working in the business to working on the business and becoming really strategic, you should start to try and understand a little bit about the M&A space. Just start to learn a bit about it and see if that resonates with you. See if that's something that you know, could see yourself doing, or that you think you want to explore further. And that, you know, don't go diving in and buy one of these courses. You know, you can buy, I mean, I have a book, Go Do Deals. You can buy a book for, you know, a few quid and learn the basic principles and the concepts around it to just give yourself an idea, is this something I like the sound of, or does it scare the crap out of me, basically?
Yeah. I mean, you need to know what you're doing, basically, and to get some education. And your book's a great start for that. So shall we move on to case study number 2 then?
And I'm tempted to do something a little bit bigger, but I want to stick with this theme of how, you know, it's the sourcing, because I think finding a deal is so important for people that are just starting out. And obviously, how I found that first deal was that pivot in what I'm going out and saying I do, and that's really you know, that's a really powerful lesson and something that I think anybody could adopt, you know, straight away. And you know, you can. The thing I often suggest is positioning yourself as an investor. So if you don't have a business that you can say I'm looking for acquisitions, or you don't want to acquire companies in that business, just going out and positioning as an investor opens the doors to, you know, potential distressed acquisitions, you know, interesting businesses, just interesting conversations generally. But I'm going to tell you the next case study is actually the second company I ever bought, because it does fit quite nicely on that same theme. Now, I've just gone back to my telecoms company, having bought this other little telco, and I am full of the joys of spring. I mean, I think, you know, I've literally had this massive breakthrough. I've suddenly realized that I don't have to run the marathon. I can just run the last 10 yards. I still get the medal. It's, this is fantastic. This is what I'm going to do. And I sit down with my little board of directors in my telco, which is an operations director, a CEO, and a finance director. And I'm explaining to them how amazing this is and how, we could do it. And then I start saying, and we could buy anything, we could buy a pub, we could buy, like any kind of business. And they're like, whoa, Jeremy, come on, we're a telecoms company. Let's stick to the knitting and just acquire other telecoms companies. And I was thinking, yeah, but if I come across something and I can do a deal, why wouldn't you just do it? I mean, it's free. Why wouldn't you just acquire anything? And they said, no, let's focus on telecoms. Anyway, I had this long, wide-ranging discussion, stroke argument with them about why we wouldn't just buy anything. By the end of it, I got them to just give a little bit of room that we could look for a telecoms company or an IT company, because at the time, BlackBerry had just come out, and when you used BlackBerry, you had to have this enterprise server installed in your office to manage your BlackBerry emails, and so we were spending quite a bit of money on IT companies to go out and do these installations. And then also we were starting to do our own billing in-house, and we were kind of a little bit lost, and so we'd taken on an outsourced IT company to support us with some of the billing requirements, so that we could effectively make sure that we did it efficiently and accurately every month and on time. When you're sending people bills, it's kind of important to get them out at the same time every month. So we started to have this IT spend, and IT and telecoms were obviously converging. So I got the board to agree to this, and literally 2 weeks later, we're interviewing for account managers. Now, all of our customers got their own dedicated point of contact, and we called them an account manager. They were really like a sort of semi-customer service salesperson type individual who sat in the company and just coordinated all of the inquiries on behalf of the client and dealt with the problem. So instead of the customer having to go through to different departments for different things, which is how most telecoms companies used to do it, just putting people around inside the organization, our customers always have this dedicated point of contact. So anyway, we're interviewing for account managers, and this guy comes along who has a CV, and he's currently the CEO of an IT company which bears his family name. So it's an eponymous company, it's named after him. And so I say, what's this IT company? And an important point here actually is I'm interviewing him for account management, but it had been long decided, and still to this day it's true, that I don't interview people very well. So I'm basically not allowed to interview people for jobs in any of the organizations I'm involved in. And so in this particular situation, my operations director is sitting alongside me, so that he'll actually ask some sensible questions, and do a proper interview instead of just chatting shit for an hour and offering them the job. So the operations director is there to ask some adult questions, and I'm just drilling into this IT company. So what does the IT company do? What do you provide? How does it work? And the company basically did network support and server installations. It was almost exactly what we're spending all this money on, And then I'm sort of saying, well, how many engineers have you got? And he goes, we've got 2 engineers and a sales guy, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, and why are you here applying for a job? Why are you in a job interview when you have your own IT company? And he said, well, my wife is pregnant, and so the room that I call the office, she calls the nursery. And also she would quite like me to be home at sensible times, because a lot of the server installations we do are overnight, and so I'll quite often be on call or going to these server installations, and so I keep some funny hours. Plus, what we tend to do is at the end of the month, I pay all of the staff, and then when the next invoice gets paid by a client, I pay myself. So I'm always the last one being paid, and she wants to make sure that, when we've got a baby around and we need some nappies or something, that we don't have these sort of pressures. So yeah, the interesting bit there was that he wasn't really interested in doing anything with the company. And I said to him, well, what will you do with this if you get a job? And he says, I'll probably just give it to the engineers, and pass it over to them, and they can take over running it. And so I'm just thinking, like, shit, this thing's just walked in through the door. This is amazing. I've just been putting it out there. It's like that book, The Secret. I just put it out there, and it confounds me. And so I say to him, do you mind if you just give us a minute? You know, could you leave the room? I'm going to have a chat with our operations director. And so he leaves the room, and I turn to the operations director and say, fuck, can you believe that? You know, like, amazing. And the operations director says, yeah, he'd make a really good account manager. And I'm just like, you haven't fucking listened to anything that's just happened in this conversation. Every question I asked was about his IT company. It was obvious, you know, we've just had a board meeting 2 weeks ago where we agreed we could buy IT companies. What the fuck is wrong with you? Like, and then I realized that you kind of tune in to looking for these opportunities, and that actually people are having conversations all the time where there's an opportunity and they're not spotting it, they're not seeing it.
It's like when you think about, I want to buy a red car, and then all of a sudden you see red cars everywhere.
Absolutely, yeah. The reticular activating system, it's called, yeah. But it's absolutely that. It's once you're tuned in, there's opportunities everywhere. And actually, I had a call with the Harbour Club just a couple of days ago, who said he'd been throwing clients at this particular company for about a year. They did a really good job for him, and he always recommended them, and he kept throwing them clients. And basically, he had a conversation, he had a call with them, and he said, look, I've sent you like 40 clients now. And they said, what do you want? Do you want some commission? And he said, no, I want 10% of the company. And they said, yeah, sure, no problem. I would love to have you on board. You know, that would be great. And, you know, and literally he just never twigged, but he now has this equity stake in this amazing business that he's passionate about and that he can drive loads of customers into, because he just, if you're not thinking about everything in terms of deals, then you just don't spot them anywhere.
Yeah. So what happened? You found out this guy wanted to, you know, had this business. How did it proceed?
Yep. Yeah, so literally all we did with that particular one, we employed him, so he became an employee. We then picked up his desk, which was in the nursery, and we put it literally in the corner of our office. And that corner became the kind of IT company stroke department. And we literally just started invoicing his clients from our telecoms company. So, and any new clients that we bought on, we invoiced from there, with the agreement from him that he would wind down his business and you know, close it down, which he did. But actually, with what I know now, that was a risk, because if he didn't, and that business ended up owing money to creditors, then potentially those creditors could have sought recourse from us, because we effectively had all the assets. We had the customers and, you know, the desk and the chair and the computer. So we effectively, we got those customers. But luckily, he was a good, honest boy, and he paid all of his creditors off, and he didn't liquidate the company. He struck the company off, made it dormant, and then struck it off. So actually, it was all dealt with legally and properly. But I guess the lesson would be, you know, I did both of those first two deals without lawyers because I couldn't afford them. Figured it all out myself, and did it. That's one of the lessons I would take from that, is that you would want to make sure that those assets were transferred at fair value, or that you just took over that company completely. We were kind of empire building at the time, so we just wanted to make our telecoms business as big as possible. So that was why we just absorbed it into the telco, because it increased our billing. But what's interesting is we probably had that business for about 6 or 7 years where it didn't really grow at all. It would, you know, lose a customer, gain a customer, but more or less stay roughly where it was for quite some time. We then sold the telecoms company, and when we sold the telecoms company, it was worth exactly the same amount with the IT business as without it. And so we thought, well, we might as well keep the IT business, because you know, it's not adding any value to the telco. And that was largely because the telco operators weren't interested in anything other than just adding customers and revenue, because that's what they were measured on. So something peripheral, they just didn't, see any value in. And so we created a separate IT company. Funnily enough, the operations director who was in that first job interview with me, he became the CEO of this new IT company. And we moved the customers over there. Now, a really interesting thing happened. In the first 12 months, that business was on its own 2 feet. Its revenue more than doubled. It literally shot through the roof. And the only sort of explanation I have is that it now had its own reason to live. It had its own balance sheet. It had its own P&L. It was, you know, the old but everything measured improves, we were now measuring it by its, sales and its invoicing. Whereas when it was in the telco, it was like a little bit lost in there. It was like the orphan bastard child in the corner, and now all of a sudden it was it had its own raison d'etre. So it kind of more than doubled in its first year. And then, interestingly, it was my first ever roll-up. So this is going back quite a few years. I then used it effectively as leverage to buy another IT company. So I merged this company into another IT company to give me about a third stake in a much bigger IT business. And then we agreed some earn-out and some deferral to acquire a major majority stake in the 87.5% it was in this bigger IT company. And then the two merged entities we used as a vehicle to then approach other IT companies with a view to growing a group of IT companies. Funnily enough, I ended up selling it back to management, so doing a management buyout of that business in 2008 or 9. Around in the world was all going weird with the global financial crisis. Sold that back to management in the end.
Yeah, fantastic. So two great case studies starting out that actually anybody could do just by changing, having a different mindset, and they were all kind of within your sphere of communication, if you like. So perhaps you could share with us a case study of maybe a bigger deal that you've done more recently that be able to get a feel of the range of kind of high revenue, as opposed to starter revenues that you've done.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I think the important thing to know is that IT company was the last one that fit that model of always has to be an IT company or a telecoms company. I think the next one was a call center. So I argued, well, a call center is telephones and computers, so it's kind of like IT and telecoms. And then the next one was a financial outsourcing business that was starting to get a little bit of a stretch. Then I bought a training company, then I bought a cooking school, then I bought a health club and a spa. So literally, a music school. I bought the London Centre for Contemporary Music down on the South Bank in London. So I basically, managed to stick to that channel that they'd given me of operations, and then just went, and went on a bit of a rampage, and a fantastic learning curve, because some of those businesses went on to be incredibly successful, and we did very well out of them. Some of them were absolute disasters, and actually some of them were both. The call center business was one of my most profitable businesses. I had it for 10 years at the time, anyway. I had it for about 10 years. It was spitting off a couple of $100,000 a quarter of net cash. Just a great business. And it went bust. And it went bust because it had too much exposure to one client, and the one client went bust. So, a great lesson there, I think, in what you do with these businesses on an ongoing basis, because when you sell a company, you create a capital event, and that capital event, solves a lot of wealth problems for you going forwards. It basically means you're no longer dependent on, putting hours into things to get your money. And that's a really important kind of step forward in the entrepreneur's journey, is to get your own wealth sorted out so that you can relax a bit and you make better decisions and you do things from a standing. But yeah, more recent deals. So basically, I went on this rampage. I did over 50 transactions between probably 2006 when I sold the Telecoms. So when I sold the Telecoms company, I'd probably done about 13 deals or 14 deals or something. I did another 50 in the subsequent 10 years. And what I noticed while I was doing all of these, because I was mainly doing distressed deals, so these were typically companies less than 5 million in revenue. Quite often they were profitable, but they had no cash flow. And look, businesses don't go bust from a lack of profit, they go bust from a lack of cash. You're deemed to be insolvent when you're unable to meet your debts when they fall due. That's section 123 of the 1986 Insolvency Act in the UK. So that's the kind of critical point where companies are in trouble. So I was doing a lot of distressed deals where the underlying business was okay, but they were really short of cash flow. And I would buy either the whole company for £1 or a vast majority of the company for £1, turn it around and sell it. or worst case scenario, I could have turned it around and we just close it down, but you could do several of these a year. So if a few didn't quite work out, at least you had one last roll of the dice and you tried to save things. But what I started to notice was that there were loads of really good quality companies, companies that were doing it, that were profitable, that were debt-free, well run, that have been going for a really long time. And yet, amazingly, from an expansion perspective, they didn't have too many options. So they didn't have access to proper banking facilities. If they wanted to borrow money from the bank, they had to pay the house. They didn't have VCs or private equity companies particularly interested in them. They didn't have a local competitor that would necessarily buy them because they're a bit small still, even when you're generating decent levels of profit. I was just astonished that there were these great businesses that didn't have too many options. And so, by that time, I was living in Singapore in the Central Business District, and I've lived there for 13 years. I'm currently at my house in Dubai, but not in Singapore. And we're surrounded by money, and it was really apparent to me that there's tons of money in private equity, there's tons of money in capital markets, there's tons of money in the world. It just doesn't seem to find its way into small business. And this really got me fascinated, and I started to really drill down into this phenomenon because if you look at small businesses, I mean, you're in the UK. In the UK, 50% of GDP comes from small businesses, and it's over 90% of the private sector workforce. So nearly everybody works in a small business, and they generate half the economic output of the country, and yet they're completely detached from all the money in the world. If you look at the top 500 asset managers, which are like, sovereign wealth funds, private equity funds, there's loads of institutions in there. Like did you know the Church of England has £8.3 billion under management in stocks and bonds and derivatives?
Property as well, don't they, Church?
Yeah, huge real estate portfolio. Yeah, so I mean, when they're asking you for a quid for the church spire, let's just dwell on that one. But yeah, so they're they've got 8.3 billion under management. Anyway, these top 500 asset managers collectively control $93 trillion of money. $93 trillion. Just to put it in perspective, the whole UK economy is about 2 trillion. So 93 trillion is almost 50 times the UK's entire economy that is controlled by these asset managers. And if you look at where they're invested, because they are passionate about diversification, they try and be as diversified as they possibly can in where they put their money. And if you look at where it is, it's in every asset class known to man. It's in Bitcoin, in real estate, in bonds, stocks, gold, silver, oil, commodities, all sorts of, every asset class, art, fine wines, whiskey. I mean, literally the investment lines that they have in there are just incredible. And then small business, which is 50% of the economy, 90% of the people who are working there, has precisely zero allocation to that $93 billion that prides itself on its diversification. When I've spoken to asset managers, fund managers, and other people, even economists about this topic, they normally say, oh, but they have VC. They have an allocation to VC. Well, VC isn't really that small business community. It's the Silicon Valley crazy money startup space, where they throw 50 million at an idea, and if it doesn't work, they only need 1 out of 10 of them to work. This is not the real economy where you and I live. The person that comes and fixes the heating or the air conditioning, or is, fixing the private company that's fixing the roads outside, or installing the windows, or local engineering businesses, local firms doing all sorts of things in the real economy. So it struck me that you've got this parallel economy where all the money is, and you've got the real economy where all the value is, where all the businesses are and the people are working. And I just figured if we could get that money into this bit, it would be an absolute game changer. And so I started off by looking at my own portfolio and looking at what I was invested in, and then trying to understand why there was no small business exposure in my own portfolio. And basically, it comes down to 3 key reasons. The first one is small businesses are really risky. If they lose a couple of clients or lose a couple of staff members, it's their worst year ever, might be their last year ever. They suffer from what I call the scale paradox, which is you have to be big to get big. And they suffer from liquidity. If you invest in a small business, it can take you a really long time to get money back out of business. So that puts off big capital from participating in small businesses. So we realized that actually doing a roll-up of businesses is a great way of solving those problems, because you create the scale when you do a roll-up, when you put lots of companies together. You create the scale, you create liquidity if you list it on a public market, because then people can buy and sell the shares every day. Well, that has an impact on overall valuation. And you make it less risky, because you're now a portfolio of businesses that are sitting under a common holding company. The challenge is what most people do when they do roll-ups. There's two big mistakes that most people do when they do roll-ups. The first one is they focus on using debt to acquire the companies. So when you keep borrowing money to buy more companies, what you're really doing is building a sort of house of cards, because they're all jointly and severably liable for each other. And sometimes you're jointly and severably liable for the whole fucking lot, because most banks want you to sign personal guarantees when you take out debt for these kind of things. And small businesses are incredibly volatile assets. You know, would you mortgage your house to buy Bitcoin? Some people will probably say yes, but you know, realistically, you have an asset class that's incredibly volatile. You have very little control over it going up or down in value. If you borrow money that you absolutely have to pay back or you lose your house in order to invest in that asset class. Well, when you buy a small business with debt, it's very much the same thing. You're effectively borrowing money that you have to pay back because it's personally guaranteed, and you're using it to acquire an incredibly volatile asset class. And it gets a little bit worse than that, because when the owner is leaving, you have to remember the owner of this small business is an expert in that business. They might, you know, you might know more about their industry, but they're an expert in that business in terms of who's working there, the clients, how it's all put together, where the skeletons are hidden, you know, everything. They know it better than anyone. And quite often they're doing the job of 3 people for the salary of half a person. So when you take a load of money and give it to them so they can leave, you're really putting yourself in a very precarious position. So, you know, I see a lot of roll-ups fail because they're fueled with debt, and eventually that comes home to roost, because a couple of the companies struggle or fail and the whole thing comes crashing down like a house of cards. The second thing is that people are obsessed with synergies and focusing on the synergies of putting a group together. Actually, putting a group together increases shareholder value, because big things are worth more than small things. But what people tend to do is they invest all of their time and effort trying to rinse out the synergies. So rinsing out the synergies might be things like getting all the companies to share a bookkeeper, or, you know, share an office space, or you know, use the same marketing thing. Sometimes they rebrand everything, and again, those ones tend to fail because people are so obsessed with changing the sign above the door to their nice new name and trying to change everything that goes on inside the business, that basically they distract the business from doing what it's supposed to be doing. And what it's supposed to be doing is going out and winning new customers and servicing those customers. And so, you know, in my experience, keeping the name and keeping the brand is very important, because that's often been generated over decades, and that's what you're buying. You're buying that goodwill. Why would you suddenly change it to something nobody in the community has ever heard or heard about? And the other thing is, when you try and rinse out those synergies, effectively what you're doing is you're implementing lots of change into an organization. And if you're going to implement lots of change into an organization, that creates an awful lot of ripples and challenges that you then have to deal with. And so effectively, you end up working much harder than you would have worked if you just started the company from scratch sometimes. And yeah, often the synergies don't materialize because in a small business, most of the value is in the culture that they have with their staff and their customers. So when you start interfering with the culture, you start to degrade the value of what it is you bought in the first place. So that's why most roll-ups don't work. And I only know that because I've been doing them for 20 years. And so I've learned the hard way. You know, things look great on a spreadsheet, but are much harder to execute in reality. You know, I know that doesn't work. And, you know, I know it's still a very popular way to do it. And I'm sure somebody can point to an example of one that has worked. I can point to 1,000 examples of ones like that. They very commonly fall over. There was one, we were doing a a roll-up of education businesses, and or we're still doing a roll-up of education businesses. And somebody pointed to ABC Learning. It's a company in Australia, and effectively they bought nursery schools, kids, kindergarten type nursery schools. And they did it with debt. They borrowed money. They were quite efficient. They didn't borrow tons and tons of money, but they still had enough debt that when the whole thing fell apart around their ears, they lost everything. The whole thing collapsed. And they used to change. They used to buy these little local kindergartens and change them to ABC learning centres. Well, a lot of these little local kindergartens had specialities. One would be good at drama, one would be good at, maths, one would be good at something else. And so oftentimes the parents would choose to send their kids to a particular one because of the strength that it had, which was this brand, this culture that it created, with the community. Well, suddenly it became an ABC learning centre, and it was like fucking Walmart for kids. There was nothing to differentiate it from anyone else. Yes, it looked prettier and it had some investment, and they changed some things, but it became this kind of flaccid vanilla kind of place. And anyway, they got away with it for many years and carried on growing, but ultimately the whole thing caved in and just didn't work anymore. So and there's a million lessons like that of where they tried to borrow money, roll them up, change the name, change the way everything operates. So effectively, you almost end up with nothing of what you bought. There was almost no point in buying it.
So three excellent case studies there, Jeremy. I really appreciate you sharing those. Looking back on your career and the things that you've done, and talking of mergers and acquisitions, if you were to go back, what would you do differently? What would you do that would be different today than what you do back then?
Yeah, look, of course, I always say no regrets because, I am the product of my experiences, and I've screwed some things up terribly and made loads of mistakes, but all of those mistakes were the stepping stones for the next sort of level of success. So I wouldn't have, any regrets from where I've gone. But of course, if I was armed, with the knowledge I have now back then, it would be, it would be incredible. But I think anybody could say that in any career. I think, I would have got started sooner. I would have started understanding mergers and acquisitions sooner in my entrepreneurial career, even though I started so early compared to others. I think, the earlier the better. I would have sold businesses sooner. So, I was in this accumulation mindset where I had to buy loads of things and own loads of things and create these empires. When you start selling things and creating the capital events, that's when your lifestyle transforms. I mean, I'm very lucky now to have houses around the world, a private jet, the boats, the cars, all of those trimmings, which you don't get when you're running a business. I don't care how successful a business is, it's very hard to have enough income to be able to enjoy all of those things. To have the time to enjoy those things, but actually to have the money. I don't think you make money running businesses. You make money when you sell them, when you create those capital events. And that's been a fascinating journey. And also the wealth stuff. So I talk a lot on Harbour Club about private wealth banking. I only discovered that, I think I was about 38 or 39 years old when I discovered private wealth banking. And effectively before that, my entire kind of investment career and personal wealth journey were very, very different to what's happened since then. And I wish I'd learned that much sooner, because the very first capital event I had back in 2006, I bought a boat. I bought a 56-foot Princess yacht. And I really enjoyed that, and that had some wonderful fringe benefits. But yeah, there might have been some slightly smarter ways to have deployed that initial capital, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So for everybody listening and watching, for transparency, I became a member of the Harbour Club in March 2020, and there's a number of things I liked about. I like the fact that there was no upsell. A lot of these programs, they have another level of programs and all that kind of stuff. So that was a real selling point for me. But it was also, more importantly, I guess, is joining a community of like-minded entrepreneurs that are upbeat, positive, that are looking for these deals and willing to help each other and support each other. And for me, it's been an absolute game changer. I mean, I'm currently working on a deal with another Harbour Club on a £9 million revenue building and construction company, you know, and that would never have happened had I not, you know, joined the Harbour Club. So it's been a mindset shift, and you know, I would suggest any entrepreneur to really to do the course, because I think it's really it's a game changer, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I would say to people, either read the book, or we've got a 21-day email course you can do as well, which is free. You can go to godo.deals. It's a website, www.godo.deals, where you can buy the book and get the 21-day course for free. And to be honest, that's a really good eye-opener to see whether it's for you or not, because I wouldn't want you to jump in and spend all the money, you know, doing the course and just go, this is too crazy, I'm out. Much better to go through that process and understand what's involved and, you know, roughly how it works, so that you're better armed to decide whether this is the sort of community that you would want to join. But yeah, I mean, you know, I'm really proud of what we've created, because it was almost accidental the way the Harbour Club came about, but it's now evolved into this incredible community of people all around the world. The app is constantly buzzing away on my phone with people announcing deals, chatting about things, looking for joint venture partners, just generally adding value to the community or explaining how they solved a particular problem. So, you know, it's so nice to yeah, it's so nice to watch.
Yeah. So we're coming to the end of the interview. I just wanted to ask you, you know, lots of budding entrepreneurs, business owners listening to this and watching on YouTube. What advice would you share with them?
Yeah, so look, if you want to start doing deals, pivot what you're saying to that you're looking for deals in some capacity, whether that's as an investor or just out and out and looking to buy a company, and start having conversations with the owners of the type of companies that you would want to acquire. So if you want to own air conditioning companies, go speak to the owners of some air conditioning companies on a nothing ventured, nothing gained basis. Just pick their brains about the industry, what their plans are, all that sort of stuff, because you'd be amazed where deals are hiding. They're not for sale. These aren't the companies that are advertising themselves for sale, but nearly every company I've ever bought has not been for sale. So it's evolved from a conversation that I've had with a business owner where it's come up that maybe I've got a solution to some of the challenges that they have. And that challenge might be they want to go and spend more time at their summer home in Portugal, or that challenge might be that they want to spend time with an ailing relative, or whatever it is. If you can find a way to help them transition to what they want to be doing, and you can get a business out of it, that's the genesis of most of the deals I've come across. So just get out there and be talking to the types of people who are owning the types of businesses that you want to own, and you'll be amazed where that leads.
Yeah, change the conversation. I think that's a great start.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, thanks, Jeremy. I really appreciate being a guest today. So how can people get hold of you?
Yeah, so all the social media stuff. So Harbour.Jeremy on Instagram, we post loads of stuff. The Harbour Club on YouTube, we post loads of stuff, loads of videos and things. Twitter, Jeremy J. Harbour is always good. You can go to jeremyharbour.com for all sorts of bits and pieces. Go do .deals if you want to get the book and get the 21-day course. Just hit me up anywhere, and I'm sure I'll pass across. I'm on LinkedIn as well. I just saw the LinkedIn sign behind you.
All that. Okay, well, thanks again, Jeremy. I really appreciate it, and cheers. Have a good day.
Excellent, thank you, and you.
Well, that really was an amazing insight into the world of mergers, acquisitions, and deals. Jeremy really is an experienced entrepreneur with so much value and experience to share. So I hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to subscribe below, hit that notifications bell, and you'll get the latest videos as they are released. And remember, if you need help with your mergers, your acquisitions and deals, please connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a direct message. And I look forward to speaking to you and seeing you on the next episode of the Mad Podcast. Bye for now.